Welcome to Women in Leadership Talk, where you'll hear from successful women who are empowering other women with their stories of adversity, resiliency, and success. And here is your host, Vicki Bradley, founder and CEO of Women in Leadership Empowered.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have those ears listening in and see what wonderful story or tidbits we're going to share with you today. So I'm excited to have Eveline Shen joining me from the Bay Area in the U.S. So Eveline, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. And we have listeners, they chime in from 92 different countries around the world. So it's awesome to have so many, dedicated, wonderful people that are listening, and they get to hear your story today and maybe take a few nuggets away with them that they're going to be able to impact their own lives. So let's jump in. Let me give you a little background on Eveline so you understand why we've invited her to the show. She is an award-winning, nationally recognized leader dedicated to empowering individuals and organizations to lead with courage and authenticity. Lord knows we need a lot of courage right now. There's a lot going on in the world. She's also an author, and she wrote a book called Against the Current, which we're going to be talking about, but she's also the founder of a company called Leading Courageously. So I'm excited to dive into that. But during her 22 years as the executive director of Forward Together, she transformed it into one of the largest multi-issue organizations led by women of color in the nation. Now, that's pretty amazing, Eveline. So we're excited to have you here and just learn more about you, what's taken you on this path, this journey. I think our listeners always love to hear where'd you come from and what brought you to where you are today. So maybe we'll just start there.
Sure. So I grew up as the daughter of Chinese immigrants in Colorado in the United States, in a town where there were very few Asians and not a lot of number of people of color. And so the mountains and the land were beautiful, but sometimes some of the people were not always so welcoming. So I learned early on to keep silent about many things and to be vigilant about racism and sexism. And I didn't know it then, but these experiences would become the seeds of my mission to make changes in this world so that girls and women of color would be respected and supported. Because when I was growing up, I never dreamt of being a leader. It wasn't something that was kind of in my awareness. And I want to do everything I can to give girls and women of color and gender expansive people of color that opportunity. Because leadership is not positional or situational. We know many leaders right now who are in positions of power who are not providing courageous leadership or the leadership that our communities need. And there are now plenty of opportunities for people who don't have leadership positions to step into their courage and provide leadership and make a difference in moving this country and in this world in the direction it needs to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's beautifully said. And, what I would add to that is leadership is also not necessarily a title, right? It's you can be a leader and influence. And I think each of us are leaders in our own right? Whether it's in your community, in your household, in your place of employment. But I would say today more than ever, to your point, this is where we need leaders to be courageous and really step up and step into what's important to you and how to continue to have those freedoms and rights. Because the world is changing, and it's not just US, it's happening in Canada, it's happening in Italy, it's happening in London, England, right? It's happening everywhere. And so it's how do we collectively become more courageous? So thank you for the mission that you're on. And so being a social change leader, that definitely is not for the faint of heart. That you got to have a lot of courage, you got to have a lot of tenacity to navigate that. So you talked about, growing up that, there weren't very many Asians where you grew up in Colorado, but was there a pivotal point where you started to recognize your own courage and you started to speak up authentically?
That's a really good question. I think that when I think about my leadership, so I want to say, first of all, that there are many ways that we can be leaders, right? So you talked about it's not positional, but also there are so many different ways people can lead and styles that people can lead. And given what we're up against, we need everyone, no matter what their style, no matter what the strengths that they and the contributions they have, to be embraced and welcomed, right? And so that starts with creating a culture that recognizes leadership in all of its vibrant forms. Because there isn't a single formula for leadership, even though there is the one most often put out there is this kind of charismatic leader leading in the front, pointing the way for everyone to follow. Leadership shows up in so many shapes and styles. Some people lead collaboratively, they build strong teams, they're lifting up the leadership of others. Some people lead on the side, motivating people to engage, finding opportunities to support each other to step up. Some people lead by service, right? Removing barriers for others, organizing resources, and helping people just find ways to participate. So one of the things I noticed about my leadership is that I started, even though I was part of the oppression that I felt, the way I protected myself was that I became quiet. I just kind of didn't speak out as much.
So you went inward.
Yeah, but I was always thinking and analyzing and watching and strategizing. And I think that one of the things I've realized when I work with leaders is that I don't count anyone out. There are people that talk a lot. There are people that don't talk very much in the beginning. But I know that there's a way in which leadership happens that you can't always see. And so part of what I noticed in my leadership was being able to honor that and then be able to take on increasing levels of leadership in college. I organized the first conference for women, on the campus. And it was about forging across differences. Like, how do we bring different groups of women together across race, across class, across ability? And how do we come together through our differences to be able to kind of align and move forward? And so by stepping into these leadership positions in different ways helped me be able to grow my leadership, helped me be able to figure out what are my strengths and what are my contributions, and to continue to grow from there, and to be able to then create containers now for other people to step in. And it's like you said, everyone has leadership to bring. And I want to create these conditions so that people feel welcomed, they feel affirmed, and they can really step into bringing their full selves into their leadership, so that their ability to achieve the kind of impact that they want to make is fueled by this kind of full power that they can bring in themselves.
Okay, great. Well, you said a few things there that I think are important to highlight and to talk about. One thing I see in leadership is, often the charismatic, yes, will become the leader. The person with the loudest voice often becomes the one, because people go, oh, okay, well, that person must know what they're talking about because they're more forceful or louder or whatever. But from my perspective, I think great leaders are able to vary their style and look at what does each individual need. And I think we're in that crossroads right now in our world with, you can't just take a brush and paint everybody the same, right? And that's what that's what we've done in the past. So it's like, how do you look at each individual exactly as that, as an individual, and what's going to motivate, inspire, and influence that person to follow you or to lead more people in the direction of whatever that strategy, mission, vision is. And that's quite complex when you put that kind of responsibility, but I think it behooves us, because to what you're saying, Eveline, you can then bring out the best in people. You bring out the best ideas, the best perspectives, and you get a broader view of what the potentiality could be of a situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So do you remember a time, like maybe that first moment where, you were like, okay, I know, I mean, you could have been a little young person at that time where you were like, yes, like I want to be this change agent. I want to be this person who impacts the world in a very positive way.
Yeah. When I accepted an internship when I was in college, it was actually in graduate school, and I had done organizing for a while. So I feel like I kind of grew up committed to making this world better. I just have this inner drive to do that.
Mhm.
And the moment I want to share with you actually is I answered this little ad for to start a summer training program for middle school aged Southeast Asian girls in Richmond, California. And it was with the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, that organization, and they had a really amazing youth organizing group for these young women. And they asked me to come in and run a summer training program. And I got to design this program that I wished I had when I was growing up in Colorado,
Those are the best.
right? Yeah. So I got to, I had these young women talk about body image and kind of what parts do they feel strong about their bodies, what parts do they not feel so great about, and then we kind of connected that with media literacy. And I had them at that point they were looking at magazines. Things were not on the internet as much, so we took out all the teenage magazines that they were looking at, and we created these collages, and then we mapped out what are the messages these magazines are giving them about their bodies, and how
Wow.
does that affect how they act, the parts of their bodies that they don't feel as
Yeah.
positive about, right? And then I had them, do something with their bodies every day, whether that was yoga, whether that was, playing volleyball. But when I was growing up, one of the ways that I dealt with the racism that I faced was feeling connected to my body in some way and feeling strong, whether it was, playing sports or being able to play music. And so I wanted to bring that to these young women to feel kind of, oh, my body can do this, right? And so these are some of the things. We did a lot of other things, like, figure out how youth, like what their community clinics looked like and how culturally sensitive they were, what their communities need, and how they think about gender roles in their families, how they talk about sex education, right? So these are all the things that I wished I had when I was growing up. I had one of the most fun summers I had in my life there, and from there I realized this is what I want to do. I want to create conditions, in these ways where I'm reaching young women and helping them become leaders that they already are, that's within them, but they sometimes, because of the oppression that they face, the conditions in their families and their communities, they're not given that chance.
Yeah.
And so that became really important to me.
Oh, I love that. And so powerful. I mean, what you were just sharing there about just that example of taking the magazines and what messaging, like there's one thing to have pictures on a page, but it's how are you internalizing that? Right. And that happens every day in our workforce. That happens every day on social media. How are we internalizing messages, and how does that potentially create barriers or walls that we aren't even conscious of? We don't even realize it's happening until it's already happened, right? And so good for you. That's super, super powerful. And I can only imagine, like, if we could talk to those young people today, like how did this having these experiences impact you? How did it help you navigate as you become an adult and in the working world or in the world, period?
Yeah, and there's actually an example that I give in the book of Sandy, who was she was in that program, and she actually continued. I left after that summer and I went on to this other organization, but I interviewed her for this book and,
Okay.
asked her kind of what she got out of it. And I think that for her, it was about talking about gender roles. It was about really helping her understand as a girl in her family and in her community, what are the things she was able to do. And because this organization, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, that she was a part of, had this really great leadership program that happened year after year, she went through it. And then she actually started leading it. And then she
Ah,
came back to my organization that I ended up leading and becoming the executive director. And she applied for a position to be a youth organizer. And we hired her on the spot, and she did amazing work. And then she went on to she became an award-winning leader and doing amazing work in her community in Richmond around environmental justice, and is still
wow.
doing that today. So she is really an inspiring example of what can happen when young women get the opportunity to, and the affirmation to really step fully into
Yeah.
their power.
I love that. Wow, that's such a great story. And thank you for sharing that. And, I'm sure that when Sandy thinks about the impact that you've had on her and now how she's also paying it forward, right? Because I think that's the part we often don't recognize is that there is a ripple effect, right?
Mhm.
So I do want to talk about your book because I think, going against the current, like that's just against the current in itself is a very profound statement. And some of the language that you use is choosing to lead against the current. And that really struck me, Eveline, because I'm all about choice, right? Like when I look at, like, my company is WIL Empowered, but my main company is called WIL Inc. And WIL is about what will do you have, right? And so choice and choosing are really important language choices that we use. So maybe talk about that a little bit. Why is choice to you so important as we navigate this world that we're in, the journeys that we're on?
Ah, absolutely. So, as you alluded to, in this world, leaders are facing really big challenges, and they're only going to get harder. And leaders who are fighting for the freedom and the liberation of our people and the planet, they are leading against the current, right?
Yeah.
Facing tremendous forces brought on by big power, by capitalism, patriarchy, authoritarianism. And you really kind of captured it, that they are choosing to do this. This is something that they are, knowing that they're facing all of this, they're still kind of moving forward. And over the course of my 2 decades as an executive director, I was fortunate to work with these powerful and inspirational leaders who were doing incredible work, choosing every day to get up and, put together, move forward, and bring their contributions to continue to make change.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from my own journey and those of other leaders that along the way, we face a lot of obstacles to
Yeah.
overcome. Challenges not only from our opposition, but sometimes from within the movement.
Mm-hmm.
And then at any given moment, demands for our time get an effort. We get pulled in all these different directions, which can keep us off balance. And
Yeah.
sometimes we feel like we can't choose because we're like, everything's urgent, right? But it's really important to remember that we have the agency and the ability to make these decisions about where we want to focus our time. And if we think about any other area in our life, so for example, like if I wanted to run a marathon, I'm not a runner, but I wouldn't decide tomorrow I'm just going to jump in and run that
Yeah.
marathon, right? I would think about, okay, in the next few months, how I'm going to train, how am I going to master the different terrain and the hills and the different ways that, what kinds of shoes am I going to need, the ways to get my body in really good conditioning, who am I going to run with to help keep my momentum, and what am I going to do if I hit a wall, and when I hit that wall, how am I going to recover and keep moving? I want leaders to bring all of this kind of thinking to mind and create conditions for their success, because sometimes leaders don't choose to do that. Because everything feels urgent, they just dive in. I've done this before, and it's kind of a sink or swim mentality. But if we take a pause, we choose to take that pause, it's a proactive pause, and we think about, okay, where are the ways that we can start to create conditions so that we can achieve the success, because the change we're trying to make is so big. Yeah. The odds are very much against us, but there are things that we can do within our control that can help us, move to the next outcome that we want and eventually reach our North Star. So I wrote this book in hopes of increasing our leadership capacity and strategy and create conditions for success, both externally and internally, because I believe that the way we do our work should not only benefit our activism and our communities, but also be good for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that. And I mean, we could have this whole conversation around choice, right? Because there's so many ways to look at just the choices you have, right? I spend a lot of time on this in my own practice with, conscious leadership of getting leaders to recognize, are we reacting or are we intentionally responding? And you do have choice, right? Because often you hear people say, well, I don't have a choice. I had to do this. And it's like, well, actually you do have a choice. But I love what you just said there, Eveline, about that intentional pause. Like that pause is so important to really decide, is this the best course of action, right? And choosing, like you're putting all in when you choose, right? So you don't want to take it knee jerk. You don't want to do it willy nilly. You really do want to put the thought into it, because what are the possible outcomes? And if we use Sandy as an example, right? You talked about, you did this internship and you did these leadership classes, and now look at the ripple effect of how that's impacted this person. And we have that responsibility as leaders, is to it's not only ourselves, it's also who are we impacting and influencing as we choose, how we're going to show up every day in every situation. Not to say that we're not going to make mistakes, because we are. That's just human nature. But it's being very thoughtful and recognizing once you choose, there is a ripple effect to it.
Absolutely. And I think that there are, like you said, there are so many ways we have choice that we may not be aware of. And also there's ways that we choose things that if we take that step back and reflect, we may not make that choice. For example, a lot of leaders identify kind of our purpose solely based on the needs around us. Oh, we need to raise money, so I'm going to jump in and figure out, how do I get a donor? Oh, my team doesn't have the capacity to run this project. Oh, now I have to step in to help out, right? Oh, our organization has to be represented in this coalition, so I'm going to fly across the country and yet again spend one more weekend away from my family. And this way, it doesn't, I don't know about you, but I know many leaders and myself, we find ourselves toiling away at something that isn't meaningful in the scheme of things. It doesn't leverage our level of experience or strengths. And so this way of leading is kind of akin to piloting a ship by only looking at the wind gauge, while you're ignoring your compass, the ocean currents, and the contributions you bring as the captain of the ship. And so this isn't really an effective way to get you to your destination. So I think that it's not only where are there choices, but what choices are the most strategic and meaningful for you to make, so that you are continuing to move the needle to where you want to go. And that's kind of one of the things I want to highlight for leaders, is to be, like you said, much more proactive around how do we use our time in a way and make these choices so that it's really connected to our values, our mission, our strengths, and who we want to be and how we want to be in this world.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And often, I mean, I'm just going to highlight that for a second because when you brought up values, that's a very important topic, right? And when when you're looking for employment or when you're hiring, that's a very important aspect of that hiring decision, right? Is are the values in alignment? Because if, for an example, if social change is not your thing, then you shouldn't be looking for a job in that field or that company, right? And values, and I hear this a lot from leaders, is a lot of reasons they leave companies is because new leadership may come in and values are different, right? And so it's being very clear what that organization's values are, but what your values are, and how do you live with yourself if those values are out of alignment?
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the pitfalls. I talk about purpose pitfalls in my book, but that's one of the pitfalls is that your purpose is not aligned with your values. So there are a lot of examples that I have seen of leaders because there's so much at stake and there's so much time pressure, right? Things again are very urgent. We have to make this change now, that they only think about what's at the end of the finish line, and they don't think about, well, how the values part comes in the process of how you get to the finish line, in my experience. So when how are you going to treat your team? How are you going to bring others along? Do you want to lift up the leadership of others? Right? So there's ways in which we can be so focused on the goal, the purpose of achieving that goal, that along the way we can almost sometimes create collateral damage of because we're not thinking about integrating our values in how we get to where we want to go.
Well, and that's why I brought it up, right? Because when you said values, that's a hot button for me, especially lately, because I have seen a lot of executives that I coach leaving organizations because the values have changed, right? And so they're like, I can't look myself in the mirror every day and go into work knowing that this is not in alignment with who I am. So
Yeah.
I think that's an important one. And I love that you brought that up about it being in your book. Um, you also talk about internal leadership systems and why that is so important versus just having the checklist or the toolbox. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that, Eveline.
Sure. So I want to start by reflecting on what an operating system is, because we don't usually pair operating system with leadership. We often think about this term in the context of computers, because I think that's where the term was coined. But operating systems exist in nature. And not only that, there are examples of leadership operating systems. So I just want to quickly share something I recently learned about orcas. Orcas are matriarchal in their leadership. And so in times of abundance, these the female orcas will shift leadership because leadership is fluid. However, when resources are scarce, it's the grandmother orcas that the pod turns to because they're leveraging her knowledge, right, based on the years that she had to survive when the salmon were not rampant. She can take them to places to find salmon, right, where that she remembered, right? She can also train the little younger orcas to hunt when resources are scarce. And she knows the places in the ocean to avoid where there are threats. So I love this because I think that it's such a great example of a number of things. But I think that when we are thinking about problems in our leadership, we don't just bring kind of a one-dimensional like reaction to what's happening in the moment. We, like the grandmother orcas, can think about problems and solutions to these problems in a much more complex way, in a systems way, where we are thinking about how do we bring our experiences, our strengths, our courage, our purpose all aligned, like we talked about, and think about it systematically versus just thinking about it like a tool. Especially when I was younger, but I think all through my career, when I needed support, what was often given to me was a tool, a leadership tool. And tools are great, but you cannot use a strategic planning tool, no matter how amazing it is, to help deal with conflict.
Yeah.
And you can't, a time management tool, no matter how great it is, right, can't help it really in supervision unless that person needs supervision around time management. So a systems approach for me is so important to have in leadership because our issues and problems are so complex. And in these times, they're unpredictable. There's factors that are beyond our control, but also around the corner that we're not even seeing. So a systems approach allows us to bring all of our leadership components to bear to the problem. We're aligning them in the way so they're moving in the same direction. And a systems approach allows us to be able to, when the terrain shifts, we can shift our strategy, right? And a tool is much more one-dimensional. You use it in this way. So that's why I believe that a leadership system really helps us be able to embody fully and engage our full power as leaders in a much more effective and powerful way because we're thinking about it in a three-dimensional, systematic way of thinking rather than, thinking about our leadership components in isolation of each other. So when you go to a bookstore, you often see, oh, here's a book on courage. Here's a book on purpose. Here's a book on how to fail forward. But these things need to come together and they also inform each other. And so you just get a lot more out of it when you think about it systematically.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. I mean, like right now I'm in graduate school doing a transdisciplinary PhD. And that is the whole philosophy is how do you take all these multi-components to solve for wicked problems, right? And it's not looking at it one-dimensionally. It is looking at it, from very different perspectives, because that's how you solve for those big, big problems. And it is taking the wisdom from you, the wisdom from me, from Joe over here, from Susie over here. Like it's bringing that all together because we all have very different, unique experiences, although they could be similar, right? And tying that all together.
Yeah, and I believe that we each have our unique set of strengths, right? So something I'm good at, you may not be, or we may be good at it in different ways, or we may be good at it in the same way, but bringing it together allows us to be able to leverage everything that everyone has to bring in a very synergistic way that can be much more powerful than if you and I are using our strengths in parallel paths and we're never really thinking about how they come to meet and how we can work together to achieve something.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Wow. Okay, Eveline, you're talking my language. So we are like getting close to our time together, but what I would like to do is maybe talk about one or two things that you would like to share from the book that our audience could walk away with today, right? Something that, you find very common in it, whether it's clients you're working with or customers you're working with, but what could they walk away and do today that would help them even start to leverage that internal leadership, that internal systematic approach?
There are two things. I know there are two things that I want to say. So one, because this book is about courage, thinking about it expansively is really important, I find, because many of the leaders that I work with, when I say to a room full of leaders, I want you to think about a recent moment of courage and tell me, raise your hand when you have that moment. And inevitably half the room is struggling to find that experience. And that's not because they're not courageous. It's because oftentimes people are thinking about courage with a big C, which I call the courage with a big C, which is, the acts of courage that are you see in the paper or read in the history books, right, of Nelson Mandela, or the person who jumped into the raging waters to save a drowning child, risking their lives. Those acts of courage are so important and make a big difference. But there are also acts of courage that I call with a little c. And those are acts of courage that we are doing every day. The courage to set limits, the courage to make those tough decisions when we know we're going to get pushback, the courage to be able to take care of ourselves, the courage to be able to speak truth to power, right? So these are all things we do every day. And so what I would say to your listeners is start to notice when you are engaging in moments of courage, because if we don't honor the courage that we are taking, we can internalize that as something that's deficient in ourselves, because we start thinking, oh, this is because I don't have confidence. This is my lack of confidence. Or it can turn into self-doubt. Do I really have what it takes to do this? But when we start to look out into the world and say, oh my gosh, this is a big risk. Look at this like I'm going up against this power. It becomes something that, okay, this is a time for my courage. It makes sense that I feel this way. And now I can call on my courage to be able to move forward, because I'm seeing clearly of what's happening. So I think that's one thing, is to really honor the courage, whether it's the courage with a little c, everyday acts of courage, or the courage with a big C, because courage begets courage. The more you use it, it's like a muscle, the bigger it gets. So that's the bigger your well of courage can be. And then the second thing I would say is that I think it's really important to notice what we have control over and what we don't. In these times, a lot of the things that are happening externally, the conditions that are changing, we actually don't have a lot of control over. And so what we do have control over is what we just talked about in the beginning, of how we respond to things. So working on calming our nervous system, being able to be grounded in the moment, right? So we can think clearly and not just, as you said, have a knee-jerk reaction, I think can be really helpful to us being able to figure out in this moment, what is the best use of my leadership, and where can I step in so that I am leading with my values. If we're in a crisis mode or survival mode, we may not be thinking that way, and we may just kind of opt for the easy way out, or the decision in front of us. And so again, we come to this notion of choice. What choice are you going to make, and how are you going to set yourself up so that you make the best choice that aligns with the life that you want to lead and the leadership you want to bring?
Lovely. Those are two great takeaways. So audience, I hope you wrote those down. If you didn't, go back, rewind, listen again. Really important messages that you shared. Like, we do have choice in how we respond or react to situations. When you're reacting, usually you end up having to go back and fix it. So take the pause. You mentioned that earlier. Take the pause and really think about, like, how do you want to show up? How do you want to respond in this situation? So Eveline, where can people find you?
So you can go to Leading Courageously. Those are two words, but no space, leadingcourageously.com. And that's my website. And you can find ways to contact me through there, and also just see how to order the book, but also, the kind of work that I do.
Okay. Awesome. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. You've tied into several words that are really important to me. As I said earlier, choices, that's a big one. And having the will to stand by your choices. It's just, oftentimes we don't think about it. And so take that moment and think about, what am I choosing here? And is that in alignment with who I am and what I am trying to accomplish in this world? So audience, thank you for being here. We know you have a choice. Please do share this episode. Let us know how we did. Give us a rating. let us know if there's other topics you would like to hear about. We'd love to hear from you. And, our mission is to continue to bring great voices, great work that lots of different people are doing around the world, but bring that to the forefront so that you get a chance to hear and learn and grow and stretch yourself. And so I think Evelyn's given you a couple of really good examples to walk away with today. So hopefully you'll take that at heart and try some of those things. And as our gift to you, please go on to our Women in Leadership Empowered website. You can sign up for our free newsletter, and that gives you lots of tips. We only send it once a month, gives you lots of tips, lots of feedback on, how to lead, but just different things on how to connect. So make sure you go in and sign up for that so that you can know what's happening at WIL Empowered. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and we will see you on the next Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Evelyn, thank you again, and have a great week.
It was a joy to be with you. Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for WIL Talk, sponsored by Women in Leadership Empowered. To learn more about our programs, please visit www.willempowered.com. We look forward to seeing you in our community.